Welcome to Tech News Briefing. It's Tuesday, June 20th. I'm Julie Chang for The Wall Street Journal, filling in for Zoe Thomas. Advances in artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, have been leading to increasing calls for regulation. And one place where those rules are beginning to take shape is in Europe. The European Union's Parliament voted last week to push forward draft legislation called the AI Act. It's positioned to be the West's first comprehensive set of AI regulations. Tech News Briefing's host, Zoe Thomas, sat down with WSJ's Brussels-based reporter, Kim Mackrael, to discuss the draft law. Here's their conversation.
So, Kim, what is the overall goal of these regulations?
Broadly speaking, the goal is to put what a lot of officials in Europe call guardrails around the development and the use of AI. So there's a feeling that, especially now, the technology is developing very quickly, and that without having some regulation, some sort of rules around how you can both develop and use it, that, in the race to be first and the race for competition among the companies that do this, they might go too far, or there might be some harms created for people and for other companies.
These rules were first proposed a couple of years ago. Roughly, what was in them?
Yeah, so some of it deals with what officials in Europe consider to be high-risk applications of AI. So, for example, the use of facial recognition tools, something that's called predictive policing, which is like basically pulling together a lot of data, which can sometimes include some individual people's criminal histories or criminal records, and trying to predict future illegal activity. Another example is real-time biometrics surveillance in a public place. So, like actually using biometrics to surveil people. Those are the kinds of things that lawmakers in crafting this legislation were thinking these are high-risk applications and are aiming to set up some guardrails around. And in some cases, for the parliament, they're actually aiming to look at bans.
These rules were first proposed in 2021, but generative AI has really taken off since then. So how has the development of ChatGPT and similar technologies changed the rules that they're looking at now?
They've played a really big role in discussions around this legislation. And as the Parliament has looked at the legislation and tried to figure out what it believes the final version should be, they've looked really closely at these kinds of tools. And what they've said, they've added some new elements to the legislation that they want to see in the final version, including a requirement to design AI models to prevent them from creating illegal content. So basically trying to make it so that in the development of those models, they won't ultimately create something that's illegal down the road. Another rule that they've looked at inserting is making companies publish summaries of the copyrighted data that they use to train the models, which at least would let people who have a copyright know that their material was used.
How is the industry reacting to the legislation?
The reactions have been a little bit varied. I think we've seen increasingly over the last couple of months some more calls from people who do research in AI, but also actually people involved in tech companies that work with AI who have called for some sort of legislation on this. So there have been some calls from industry itself for rules around the use of AI. But at the same time, some tech company lobbyists have said that the Parliament's version goes too far, that they think that some of it is too prescriptive, and especially when it comes to what they consider to be low-risk uses for AI. And they're saying that there's a risk it could hinder innovation. So you've got two different perspectives there.
And really quickly, what happens now?
The EU legislative process is a bit complicated, and this is one step along the path. So basically, now that Parliament has sorted out what its position on the legislation is, you can get into these discussions. These are meetings that will happen between representatives from the European Parliament, from the Commission, which is the executive body for the EU, and representatives from the member states. So they will literally get together in a room and hash out what the final shape of the legislation should be. They've started that already, and they're hoping to finish it by the end of this year. So there is a push to try to hammer out what the final version will look like fairly quickly.
All right, that's our reporter, Kim Mackrael. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that is it for today's Tech News Briefing. For more tech stories, check out our website, WSJ.com. I'm Julie Chang for The Wall Street Journal. Thanks for listening.